Welcome to another edition of Beneath the Surface with Scott Gibson. The increased demand of potash shows in the stock prices as not a lot of additional supply is available on the market. Scott sat down with David Coffin, editor of the Hard Rock Analyst, to discuss the availability of potash on the market. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Scott Gibson with Beneath the Surface. I'm here with David Coffin, Hard Rock Advisors and Hard Rock Analyst newsletter. Thanks for being with us, David.
Oh, my pleasure.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about potash, and specifically the supply-demand fundamentals and how that's been driving the price of potash and the price of the various potash stocks over the last little while.
Sure. Potash is like a lot of the bulk commodities. For a long period, for decades, the price was stable, low, and really keyed to allowing just enough room to produce most years. The change that comes from that is that as demand has picked up, as it has for many things, for potash, there hasn't been a lot of excess supply to meet that new demand. So a relatively minor demand shift becomes a big multiple in the market. That's happened with potash. The price has gone up hugely. And now there is a broader commercial search, not just for new supply, but some diversity of supply. The geography of supply for potash currently is a third of it comes from Saskatchewan, a third of it comes from Russia and Belarus, which market jointly. So you've got two-thirds of the market coming out of two marketing companies. The balance is spread around a bit, but with those two giants, they tend to make the price. So with new commercial entrants in the market, one of them is obviously BHP, who took a run at Potash Corp of Saskatchewan last year. They would like to see some diversity of supply, just so that they don't have to get into disputes with the jurisdictions where they're working. That makes complete sense.
Yeah. Well, and talk a little bit more about the political implications there of these various different countries, what their motivations are, both for their own countries and some of the companies, where they'd like to go and what they'd like to acquire.
You know, their motivations are going to be a little bit different, but if you look at their histories, they were developing potash deposits when nobody else wanted to. You can argue the good and bad of that in terms of market economics, sure, but that's the simple truth of it. So they were supplying fertilizer when it was difficult for anyone to do that on a commercial basis. Now, good or bad, they expect some kind of return on that investment. And that's right. The entry of large miners like BHP rather, needs to recognize they have to make their returns. It's a relatively expensive business to get into, and potash isn't actually a huge market. Market growth has been impressive, and the growth in price and therefore bottom line for existing producers has been impressive, but the overall scale of the market is not large. It's certainly not comparable to something like iron ore. So you need to recognize that specialty aspect to it and respect both sides have valid arguments. I certainly have respect for BHP feeling it had the right, it did certainly, to bid on Potash Corp. But I also understand the reluctance, not just by government, but by the corporate world in Canada to see that bid go through and to lose another large Canadian mining company. The reality is the timing was good from BHP's perspective, and that's been demonstrated by the fact that Potash Corp of Saskatchewan hasn't traded below that bid since it started. You know, it was a rising market, and what Potash Corp of Saskatchewan does going forward, we'll just have to wait and see. But the other big sources of supply are in Russia, which is difficult for foreign investment, and in Belarus, it's a state-owned company.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of things there, but one in particular is the effect that this has had then on the producing companies, the major potash companies. My interest lies in sort of the smaller companies, the small cap or the mid-tier, and can you explain a little bit about the trickle-down effect and what that's had for them?
Well, the trickle-down effect is the value of their assets has obviously increased along with the value of the product. There has been several areas where juniors have gone in, picked up assets, and are doing well because of it. Again, that plays to the diversity question. There's an old district that may be reopening in Ethiopia, Eritrea. It's on the border of those two countries. A difficult place to invest for quite a while. That's part of the reason the opportunity is there. It's a shallow resource area. It's in being tested. There are senior and junior companies both, and the juniors have been able to do well because it does represent a potential supply diversity for potash.
Well, you mentioned Canada, you mentioned Eritrea. What other sort of areas do you like in terms of potash? Where's the opportunity?
I think you look, there's a good potash, several actually good potash districts in the U.S. The U.S. currently supplies about 1 million tons of finished product to a 30+ million ton market, which is substantially less than they use. So there's an obvious upside there, plus you have the advantage of working in U.S. dollars, so you have the automatic currency hedge, if you will. Other than that, I would look, there are several other places in Africa where people are working on potash deposits. In Australia, they're being looked at. The big producers outside of the ones I've mentioned is Germany, because they developed the industry. That was a focus there. And the other interesting one to keep an eye on both sides of the Dead Sea, there's potash production, and one of those companies also runs soft rock mines in Britain. And they're all looking at Saskatchewan because it's an obvious growth area, but they'll also be looking at other areas, and quite frankly, the simplest way for me to do my job is keep an eye on what they're doing.
Well, I have various investments in the potash space. What's your take sort of going forward? Is this a good sector to be in?
I think it's a good sector to be in. You do have to be conscious of the fact that the excess requirement will fill up in due course. So you want to think about why you're in a given stock. Solution mining is likely to come more to the fore. We certainly aren't avoiding Saskatchewan situations. There's a couple that we do like, but we do balance that against the diversity requirement, and I think that's probably the best move going forward. We're quite happy to look at the U.S. stuff. We haven't taken a hard look at the Australian stuff yet, but we will at some point. So I look broadly, and I keep bringing up outside of Ethiopia, where I think there's a potential large expansion to the global resource. Relatively straightforward, safe, mineral exporting jurisdictions, and they have the keys in place to do the job. So that's well worth keeping in mind. Any bulk commodity transport is important. If your transport costs are high, or there simply isn't the transportation available, then it's a difficult product to deal with. You do have to be cognizant of that. So looking at areas where that infrastructure already exists is important, or someplace that's very close to the coast, as is the case with Ethiopia or Eritrea.
Well, a number of issues to be concerned with potash, from the location to the distribution to the supply and demand fundamentals behind potash. But potash is an opportunity right now. Potash is an opportunity. There is likely to be a continued growth in demand within agriculture. That's obviously keyed to more people, but it's also keyed to higher end consumption that requires more crop. Fertilizers, the one way to expand that net of creating a new land base, which obviously we can't do. Yeah, thank you very much, David Coffin, for being with us in regards to talking about potash. My name again, Scott Gibson with Beneath the Surface. Thanks for being with us.
Feel free to send us your feedback or questions to bts@kitcogibson.com. Thank you for watching.